My name is Helen and I am 68 years old. For nearly 10 years, I slowly learned what it feels like to disappear inside your own life. I didn't vanish all at once. There was no single dramatic moment at first, just a gradual erosion like water wearing down stone. I told myself it was normal. I told myself I was being patient, loving, supportive. In truth, I was sacrificing my peace to preserve someone else's comfort. Before my daughter-in-law entered my life, things were calm. Not exciting perhaps, but full. My husband Richard and I built this house over decades, emotionally as much as physically. He was an engineer, careful and exact. I was a librarian, methodical and observant. Together, we created a life that valued stability, memory and quiet joy. When Richard passed away suddenly 15 years ago, this home became more than shelter. It became my anchor. Every room held echoes of shared laughter, arguments resolved, and dreams fulfilled. Our son Mark grew up here. Even now at 42, he still carries the same earnest kindness he had as a boy. He became an architect, following his father's love of structure but adding his own artistic vision. Mark has always been gentle, and for a long time I believed that gentleness was his greatest strength. I later learned it could also be his blind spot. When Mark introduced me to Chloe 12 years ago, I understood his attraction immediately. She was polished, confident, radiant in a way that drew attention without effort. An interior designer with a sharp eye and sharper ambition, she spoke with certainty about everything, from color palettes to nutrition to family dynamics. I welcomed her openly. I wanted my son to be happy. I wanted to believe love had found him. The early years were smooth. A wedding, then children, Lily and Leo, who brought noise and joy back into my quiet home. Lily is thoughtful and reserved, much like I was at her age. Leo is all motion and laughter, a mirror of his grandfather's restless energy. For them I tolerated far more than I should have. Love can make endurance feel noble. At first, Chloe's influence appeared harmless, helpful even. She offered suggestions, framed always as improvements. Began with my home. One weekend while I was away visiting my sister, she and Mark rearranged my living room. Furniture I cherished, pieces tied to memories of Richard, were removed and replaced with sleek, minimalist alternatives. I smiled and thanked them, swallowing the ache in my chest as I told myself it was only furniture. But it was never just furniture. Then came the comments about my cooking. Sunday dinners had always been sacred in this family. I cooked simply the way Richard loved. Chloe critiqued everything: too much butter, too much salt, not healthy enough. She brought her own dishes, praised them lavishly, and gradually my meals became background noise. Even Mark began choosing her food over mine, eager to support his wife. The shift with my grandchildren hurt most. Chloe started feeding them before visits, citing sensitivities and routines. My table, once a place of shared warmth, became ceremonial. The message was subtle but unmistakable. My care was no longer needed. Worst of all was how she positioned herself between me and my son. Calls went unanswered. Texts came from Chloe instead. Conversations filtered, scheduled, managed. I became a guest in my own family dynamic, careful not to offend, afraid to complain. I convinced myself silence was protection. I was wrong. What I didn't yet realize was that my silence wasn't keeping peace. It was clearing the path for something far darker. I thought enduring quietly made me strong. I didn't yet understand that endurance was exactly what she was counting on, and that the real breaking point was already on its way. Looking back, I can now see that Chloe never rushed. She didn't need to. She understood something I didn't at the time. Control works best when it feels invisible, when it looks like help, when everyone believes it's being done for their own good. After the furniture incident, I became more careful with myself. I told fewer stories. I offered fewer opinions. I learned to pause before speaking, mentally scanning my words for anything that could be interpreted as criticism. Chloe, on the other hand, grew bolder. Her comments sharpened, though always wrapped in a smile, always delivered with plausible deniability. She had a way of making me feel outdated without ever saying the word. She'd sigh lightly while scrolling through her phone and say things like, "Oh Helen, people don't really do it that way anymore," or "That's how it used to be, but we know better now." It wasn't cruel on the surface. It was dismissive. And dismissal, I learned, cuts deeper than open hostility. Mark never noticed. Or maybe he noticed and didn't want to see. Whenever I hesitated or fell quiet, He'd beam proudly at his wife and say, "Chloe's just very efficient, Mom. She keeps everything running smoothly." And she did, at least from his perspective. She scheduled, organized, optimized. She ran their life like a well-designed space, removing anything that didn't fit her vision, including me. My role shifted gradually. I went from being a mother to being a background character. Decisions about holidays were made without consulting me. School events, birthdays, even illnesses. I often learned about them after the fact. Chloe framed this as kindness. "Oh, I didn't want to bother you," she'd say. Or, "I knew you had your own routine." What she really meant was, "You're no longer essential." The grandchildren noticed before I did. Lily began asking quieter questions. "Why doesn't Dad call you anymore, Grandma?" Leo would sometimes ask why they didn't come over as often. I brushed it off, refusing to plant seeds of doubt in their minds. Children shouldn't have to navigate adult conflict. I carried that burden alone. Sunday dinners became performances instead of gatherings. Chloe arrived impeccably dressed, carrying her own carefully curated dishes. She praised health, balance, moderation, always in contrast to what I provided. Mark mirrored her effortlessly. He didn't realize he was slowly turning away from the woman who raised him, spoon by spoon. What hurt most wasn't the rejection. It was the rewriting. Chloe had a gift for narrative. She subtly recast me as fragile, forgetful, well-meaning but behind the times. If I disagreed with her, she'd tilt her head and say, "Helen, are you sure? I thought we talked about this." If I corrected her, she'd smile sympathetically and say, "Of course, if that's how you remember it." It planted doubt, not just in Mark's mind but in mine. I began questioning my own reactions. Was I too sensitive? Was this just generational difference? Every self-protective instinct I had was countered by fear. The fear of becoming that mother-in-law. The one people whispered about. The one who caused rifts. So I chose silence again and again. But silence, I was learning, doesn't neutralize manipulation. Fertilizes it. The kitchen became her favorite stage. She'd stand beside me while I cooked, commenting lightly on techniques, ingredients, timing. Always suggestions. Always delivered as concern. "You look tired, Helen. Maybe this is too much for you now." She said it softly, kindly, as if she were already preparing others for a version of me that needed managing. Mark absorbed it without resistance. Why wouldn't he? Chloe was calm, polished, reasonable. I was the one growing quieter, smaller, less certain. Still I endured. For Lily's warm hugs. For Leo's muddy shoes by the door. For the belief that love meant patience. What I didn't know was that Chloe wasn't merely reshaping the family dynamic. She was waiting. Waiting for the moment when no one would question her authority. Waiting for the moment when my voice would no longer matter. Waiting for the moment when she could finally say out loud what she had been thinking all along. And that moment, sharp, whispered and unforgettable, was closer than I ever imagined. I believed the worst damage had already been done. I didn't yet realize that everything up to this point had only been preparation. For the night she finally stopped pretending. The Sunday everything unraveled began like all the others. I cooked out of habit as much as love, moving through my kitchen with practiced familiarity. Roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, carrots glazed just enough to shine. I told myself to stay calm, to focus on Lily's smile and Leo's laughter. I told myself Chloe was just noise, and noise could be ignored. For a while it worked. The children arrived first, bursting through the door with energy that filled the house. Mark followed, tired but affectionate. Chloe entered last, composed and immaculate, carrying a dish she clearly expected to be admired. The evening unfolded with polite conversation and careful balance. Mark talked about work. The children talked about school. Chloe performed attentiveness like an art form. At the table, she barely touched my food. She praised her own dish. Mark mirrored her choices. Noticed. Always noticed. But I stayed quiet. After dessert, Mark offered to help clean up. Chloe stopped him with a gentle hand. "You sit. I'll help Helen." The kitchen door closed behind us. At first, there was only the sound of running water. Plates clinked softly. Steam fogged the window. Then she moved closer, too close. Her voice dropped, smooth and deliberate. "I don't know why you bother with all this," she said. "It's exhausting watching you pretend you're still needed." Froze. She turned toward me, her smile gone, her eyes cold. You love playing the devoted grandmother, the selfless martyr. But let's be honest, this house, your food, your traditions, they're outdated. Just like you. I couldn't speak. She leaned in and whispered the words that finally shattered everything. You old witch. I only tolerate you because of my husband. The insult didn't sting the way I expected. Instead, it clarified. 10 years of doubt burned away in an instant. I laughed. Not kindly, not loudly, but freely. You won't have to tolerate me anymore, I said calmly. Her confidence faltered. I turned away, drying my hands, ending the conversation without another word. That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. I thought her whisper was the end of it. I didn't yet know it was the beginning of the most decisive week of my life. Monday morning felt different. Clear. Resolute. I made a list. Simple, practical. Locksmith. Lawyer. By afternoon, the locks on my house were changed. Each click of metal felt final. Painful, yes, but necessary. This home was mine. My sanctuary. The phone call came that evening. Mom, Mark said, confused. My key doesn't work. I changed the locks, I replied. Silence. Confusion turned to frustration. Chloe's voice hovered in the background, concerned and soothing. He stayed calm. I told him the truth without explanation. I needed privacy. Boundaries. He didn't understand. How could he? He'd never needed them. That night, I locked the door and stood there listening to the quiet. Not peaceful but powerful. I knew Chloe wouldn't accept this quietly. And I was right. They came the next evening. Mark looked exhausted. Chloe looked devastated, at least on the surface. I opened the door with the chain on. Chloe cried. Apologized. Claimed confusion. Claimed love. Mark tried to mediate. He wanted peace. Chloe wanted control. I told the truth. Only. Precisely. I repeated her words from the kitchen. She denied everything. And then she did what I had always feared. She questioned my stability. Mark hesitated. Doubt flickered across his face. That hurt more than any insult. I set my terms. Chloe was no longer welcome. Mark and the children were, by invitation. Closed the door. I thought I might lose my son that night. I didn't know the truth was already on its way to him. Days passed in silence. Then my phone buzzed. It was a screenshot. A message from Chloe. Meant for someone else. She called me an old witch. Bragged about manipulating Mark. Planned to claim my home. Laughed about waiting me out. Moments later, Mark texted. I'm so sorry. Can I come over? When he arrived, he broke down in my arms. The denial was gone. The truth undeniable. The weeks that followed were painful but honest. Lawyers. Separation. Boundaries. One afternoon, Mark helped me bring my mahogany sideboard back home. He placed it exactly where it belonged. My house felt whole again. I learned something vital. Peace at any price isn't peace, it's surrender. And sometimes the bravest act of love is drawing a line. My name is Helen. I am 68 years old. And my life finally belongs to me again. If you're quiet to keep the peace, ask yourself. Who is that peace really protecting?